Hi, I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. Hi, I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, a lot of people they talk about trees, and when it gets to wintertime, they can't figure out what the tree is because they don't know how to ID a tree. So we took that in consideration, and we kind of have that as a show topic for today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's topic. We have Laurie Thomas coming on with us. You know, she's a big part of our team, and she does the Tree of the Week all the time, right? So she's covered 80 plus species that we have here in Kentucky. But you're right, Renee, it is challenging to identify trees when we don't have the leaves, right? Leaves make it kind of easy because they're so unique. But there are some other ways that you can identify trees when we don't have those leaves. And we're really excited to have Laurie on talking about that. We also have with us Dr. DJ McNeil in our new Wings of Kentucky segment that we're starting out. But he's going to be talking about feeding basics, you know, how to go about feeding birds from feeders and stuff. So we're really excited to have DJ on with us again. So great show. If you all have questions for our presenters, hit us up on the chat pod. Or if you're on YouTube, you can email us at forestry.extension@uky.edu and we can respond that way. But Renee, I'm delighted to be with you and really excited about today's show topics.
Exactly. And welcome back. We appreciate you being here.
Glad to be back. Yes.
All right. So Laurie, if you want to turn your camera on, thank you for joining us and talking about winter tree ID. Like I said, a lot of people, they're like, I don't know how to do this in the winter time. So you're going to show us a little basics on how to.
Yes, so we'll go over a few of those basics because the way I look at we've covered summer tree ID with the leaves on. And for me, especially, you know, we learned how to identify trees in the fall or in the summer and the fall. When I really got to know trees is when I started looking at them in the winter, when you can get up close and you really start to notice some of those finer characteristics. And this is a great time. We've done some practice with the leaves. Now let's look more closely at those trees there without the leaves. Look at the other characteristics. So we're going to go over some of the basics of winter tree identification. If everybody can see that.
Gotcha.
Good deal. All right, so when we're going over winter tree identification, we're going to look at some different characteristics than we do with the leaves on. No longer have the leaves, so we're going to focus really on those twigs, and we're going to look at the buds, and we're going to look at how that twig looks, what those buds look like. So looking at some of these characteristics with the twig will help us with winter tree identification. So to do that, we kind of got to go over some of these. Let's get some background information. So looking at some of the parts of the twig, we have our terminal bud at the very top of our branch. And it's like it says, the bud formed at the tip of the twig. That's your terminal bud, and it's responsible for that shoot elongation once spring warms up and that bud pops and starts to grow again. And then we've got our lateral buds, and these are the buds that are formed on the sides of the twigs. And these are actually formed these were formed during the growing season of last year in the base of the leaf that was on there last year. And we'll talk about leaf scars in a minute. But so these are the lateral buds. There's one there. And I was going to say, let me actually get my laser pointer. That'll help. We got a lateral bud there, one there, and there. And then we've got our terminal bud scale scar, and that's where the terminal bud was last year. So you can see and these will be lines that go all the way around, and they're usually multiple lines and that go all the way around the twig. So the last year's growth was this much on that twig. This is where that terminal bud was last winter. And so this is after this growing season, this is how much it's grown. And then lastly, we'll notice, and a good description for certain species are the lenticels, which are like these little light dots that we see all along the twig here. And those are simply pores that permit gas exchange in that twig. So we'll look at a few more characteristics. So we'll just a quick review. We got our terminal bud, different species here. So you're noticing how our buds look different based on species. That's how we're able to use our buds to help us with identification. Got our lateral bud here again. See, it's on the side, and it looks much different than what our last twig that we looked at. And then another characteristic are the bud scales. And these are the small scale-like structures that are modified leaves covering the bud during the winter dormancy. They're protecting that bud, all of that material that will be leaves, new shoot, potentially flowers, all of that. Those are protecting that bud. And those bud scales are going to vary based on the species. And we'll see a few different ones because we're going to actually identify a few trees, but you'll notice these are nice, smooth. They kind of have a nice tawny color and they're overlapping. Some buds will have just a single bud scale over it. Some of them will only have, it'll be bivalve. It'll look like a duck's bill, nice and smooth, no overlapping. Some will be shaggy. Some will even be fuzzy. We call that tomentose. So looking at bud scales can also be very helpful when we're doing tree identification in the winter. More to look at on the twig. There's a lot of information packed in on these twigs. So I had mentioned before leaf scars. So the leaf scars are very helpful in identifying trees in the winter, and the leaf scars where that leaf was attached during the growing season. So you can see there's a leaf scar there. We've got one here that looks much different, rounder, and then we've got one that's great big right here. Actually looks kind of like a shield. And so the leaf scars are going to look different depending on the species because the leaves look different. Some are big, like this one has a much larger leaf because it's got a big leaf scar than this one, which is a much smaller leaf scar for this species right here. And then we've got our bundle or vein scars. We also call these vascular bundle scars. And this is simply the veins or the vascular tissue that carried the water to the leaf. And sometimes you can really see them clearly. We'll start at the one here at the top. We've got just a few, and there's 3 of them there, and they don't stand out as well, but that can be a helpful identification. And those are simply, they just look like little dots, and those were the vascular bundles or those veins that helped carry that water to the leaf during the growing season. Now in our sample over here, they stand out real nice. We've got a big line of our vascular bundle scars because this was a much larger leaf. This is actually from a hickory, which if anybody remembers, it is a compound leaf. So it's a much larger leaf. It's made up of multiple leaflets than we have on this species right here. And then we've got stipule scars, and those occur in pairs or they'll surround the twig just above the leaf scar. And the stipule scar, I'll note that they're not found on all twigs. Not all species have stipule scars, and stipule scars are just those, they're like modified bracts at the base of that leaf petiole. And they fall off when that leaf falls off, but that's what that is just a stipule scar. And again, it can be a good identifying characteristics, but it's not necessarily found on all species. All right, so another characteristic that pops up when we're doing winter tree identification, and I'm using a lot of these because we're going to use a dichotomous key again, just like we do when we do identification in the summer with leaves. They make them for twigs as well. But we're going to look at obviously different characteristics. So we've looked at what's going on our twig with our buds and stuff like that. But another question that pops up a lot of times in our dichotomous keys are questions about the pith. And the pith is simply just the interior part is kind of a spongy like substance. It's different than the woody part on the outside, but it's in the interior part of our twig. And the piths will be different. There'll be different colors and different shapes based on species. So sometimes you can have a round pith. And when you're looking at a dichotomous key, what they'll say is, is it a rounded pith? That means you're going to need to actually take some pruners to cut that twig or that branch off so you can see this cross section. But some species have rounded piths, and they can be different colors. Notice how this one's white and this one's much more kind of an orange or brown color. Depending on the species, it can be an angled pith or even star-shaped pith. And then also another question that pops up, and actually one that we're going to look at with one of our samples, talks about, does it have a continuous pith? Is it solid through that twig, or is it chambered? You can see how this one's chambered. It's kind of like stacked on top of each other. Now to look at this, you're actually going to need a little knife so that you can kind of scratch down into that twig to open it up to get a different kind of view, more of a cross section of your pith. So this can be helpful as well, just depending on the species. All right, another thing that we're going to look at, and this is a characteristic that we looked at when we were looking at leaves, and that's arrangement of the buds. Well, we talked about arrangement of the leaves in summer ID, but we were also referring to the buds in that as well. So this is the arrangement of our lateral buds. Are they opposite? You notice how these buds are opposite from one another. And right below each one of those buds is a leaf scar. So those leaves would have been opposite from one another too. Or are they alternate, meaning are they staggered along that twig? And you'll see how these are nice and staggered from each other. And you'll notice that's a great big leaf scar and a large bud, but that was last year's leaf. So if the leaves are alternate, the buds will be alternate as well. Or if they're opposite, they will be opposite. And if you can remember back to summer identification, we had that mnemonic of mad buck. These are our tree species that are native to Kentucky that have oppositely arranged buds in the winter, we're talking buds, or leaves in the summer. And those are maple, ash, dogwood, and buckeye. So remember that mnemonic of mad buck, and you'll remember the species that have oppositely arranged buds. And you can even see that it shows up in the branching as well. You maybe don't notice branching and stuff so much with the leaves on because everything's kind of covered up, but in the winter, you'll notice it a lot more. It stands out and much more easy to see. So you got oppositely arranged buds and you've got oppositely arranged branching as well. Whereas on this one, we have alternately arranged buds with alternately arranged branching too. All right, so that's just a quick and dirty kind of basics of some of the characteristics we need to be thinking about and understand when we're doing winter tree identification using a dichotomous key. And that's what we're going to focus on. So I wanted to remember back in summer identification, we used the tree finder, the little pocket guide. And this helps you identify trees using their leaves. It's about 70 different species that are native to the eastern half of the United States. Real nice pocket guide, dichotomous key. About $5, you know, from Amazon or Barnes and Noble or someplace. Well, they also make a winter tree finder as well. So this is, you can use this when we don't have leaves. So it's going to go through all the characteristics of the buds that we just kind of went over to help us identify a species. Same with the winter tree finder, pocket ID, 70 or so species, $5 inexpensive. I will point out though that it does not include our evergreen trees, think of our needle type trees or our gymnosperms that retain their leaves throughout the year. Those you'll need to go back to the tree finder because that's for identification with leaves. This is for trees that do not have leaves in the winter, which we do have one or two of our needle type trees, think bald cypress, that do lose their needles in the winter. But this is a great little resource, inexpensive. Like I said, pocket guide. It's got a scale on the back. It's great. But there is the iNaturalist is a free app, and I bet most of you all have used this or have it on your phone. But it's a free app to download on your phone. And it's not a dichotomous key, but it does help in identification. So simply open up your app, get a good, nice, clear picture of your specimen that you're looking at or trying to identify, making sure you're including the buds and a little bit of that branching. Don't want to get it too close up. You want to be able to see all of it, make it good and clear, and then you take a picture, submit it, and then it's going to generate, going through its database, things that might look like this or that iNaturalist thinks this might be, and then it'll pop down a list for you with photos associated that you can kind of go through and say, yes, I think that's my species. That's what I'm looking at, or no, that's not. So while not a dichotomous key, it's a handy little tool when you're out in the field because everybody usually has their phone with them as well. All right, let's take out our pocket guide, our winter tree finder. That's where all of these pictures are from. And let's try to identify this sample right here. This is the same. This is just a close-up picture of this same species from a distance right here. So we're going to go to page 6 where it says begin here, just like it did in the summer guide. And remember, it's a dichotomous key, so it's got 2 statements or questions. That's where the die part comes from, that you're going to read over and see which one most closely matches your sample that you're trying to identify. So if we begin here, it asks if the tree is a conifer, needle bearing, but sheds its needle in the winter. Or if the tree is not a conifer, go to this symbol. Well, this tree isn't a conifer. You notice we have these very prominent buds that we looked at, that we talked about before. So we know this tree is not a conifer. So we're going to remember what this symbol, it looks like our tree without leaves. Going over to the next page. And that's the top bracket that we're going to look at. Got two more statements. And this one's asking questions about how our buds or our leaf scars are arranged. So it would be the same as if we had leaves on there. So it asks if the leaf scars are alternate. And if you don't remember what it means, it actually spells it out for you. Or are our leaf scars opposite from one another? When we look at our sample, you can see them here. You can see the buds are clearly opposite in this far away picture, but up close, we can see very nicely that our leaf scars are opposite from one another. And this one shows up real nice right here. So we're going to go below to the symbol, this next bracket where we've got the two arrows being opposite from one another. Now it's asking us about a little bit more about the leaf scars to help narrow it down. It says if the leaf scars are whorled, that is if there are more than two leaf scars around the twig at the same level, it would be a catalpa. Or if the leaf scars are not whorled but come in pairs, each one on the opposite side from one another. Well, we only see two leaf scars. We don't see that third leaf scar here. So we know we don't have a catalpa. So we want to remember what our oppositely arranged leaf scars or buds symbol looks like and flip over to page 44. Top bracket. Now it's asking us about the thickness of this twig. So it says, is the entire twig an inch or more in thickness, and the terminal bud is oval and conspicuous? Well, that's a conspicuous terminal bud, but we notice that our twig is not a quarter of an inch thick, and also our terminal bud is not oval. This is what they mean by an oval. Like, it looks very much oval shaped, whereas ours look like little cones kind of stacked together there. So if the entire twig is not a quarter of an inch or more thick and it does not have an oval terminal bud, we want to go below. So now it's asking us a little bit more if the terminal buds are rough and dry. When we look at our this is our sample here. Ignore that was just to let us know what an oval bud looks like. But our terminal bud, those look pretty rough and dry. And the bundle scars form an almost continuous line on the shield-shaped or oval leaf scar. Well, we have it looks like a shield, kind of oval leaf scar. And you remember the bundle scars are those little lines that fed water. Those were for those veins that fed water into the leaf during the growing season. Those make a very nice continuous line. And our leaf scar is definitely in a shield shape. Or it asks if the terminal buds are not rough and dry. We already said ours were. And the leaf scars are narrow. That is definitely not a narrow leaf scar with only 3 bundle scars. We go below. Well, we've got multiple bundle scars and our leaf scars not narrow. So we know we've got an ash tree of some description. Remember, our buds were opposite and mad buck, maple, ash, dogwood, buckeye. So we know we've narrowed this down to an ash. So we're going to go to this is what the fruit looks like on an ash tree over to page 46. Remember what that symbol looks like. It's the top bracket. So now it's asking us a little bit more about the twig, and it's going to ask us some questions about the seed, but we don't have any seeds here. But it says, is the twig 4-sided? So by 4-sided, it's a square twig. And if you rolled that in your fingers, you would definitely be able to feel it. And here is what it means by a 4-sided. And you can see clearly there are 4 sides. You can see that nice squared up section. That would be a blue ash. But that's not our sample. Our sample does not have squared sides. It's rounded. You can actually see rounded does not have that 4 sides. So we no, it's not a blue ash. So our twigs are not 4-sided. So we're going to go below. Now it asks if the leaf scar is notched at the top so that it is somewhat horseshoe shaped. And then it talks about the fruit, which we don't have. Or if the leaf scar is semicircular or oval, you'd go to the next page. Well, our leaf scar definitely looks like it's a horseshoe. There's our leaf scar there. There's our leaf scar there. So if we were going to compare it to what it says, if the leaf scar is semicircular or oval, this would be semicircular or oval, and that would be a green ash. Instead, and here's the bark of our tree, instead what we've got is a white ash. And we can see we've got that U-shaped, horseshoe-shaped, U-shaped leaf scar, which is indicative of a white ash, whereas our green ash is going to have that D-shaped leaf scar. And our blue ash had the square twig. So those are kind of some easy winter characteristics for helping us distinguish some of our different ashes that we have here in the state. All right, let's do one more. Okay, this one's a good one. I like this one. This has the great, you notice how the bud scales look much different on this one. Actually looks like it's almost one whole bud scale just sitting over top of our lateral buds there. Okay, so we go back to page 6, begin here. Well, we know this is not a conifer. It has its leaf scars where it's dropped its leaves. So we're going to go to the next page. Now it's asking us if the leaf scars are alternate or if the leaf scars are opposite. Well, we see a leaf scar here and we see a leaf scar up here. Clearly, those are staggered and those are alternate. So we're going to go to the bottom set of brackets. Now it's asking us if the twig is over 1/2 inch thick, or if the entire twig is not over 1/2 inch thick. Well, looks like a very slender twig. And if we can see as we put our scale, and this scale is actually on the back of your tree finder, that we're not even 1/4 inch thick. So we know it's not a big, thick, stout twig. Instead, it's a much finer twig. So we're going to remember what that symbol looks like and flip over to page 9. And it's going to be the bottom bracket this time. So in this one, it's going to ask us some questions about our leaf scar in the pith. So this one actually asks some questions about the pith, that spongy interior of our twig. So it asks if the twig is stout and tough. Well, we know it's not really stout because we measured that it wasn't even 1/4 inch. Is it difficult to break? Well, these are pictures, we can't tell. With the light colored lenticels, well, there might be 1 or 2, can't really see that well there. And it has a tan or brown pith. Well, this is the pith of our sample here, and that is clearly not tan or brown. In fact, it looks very lovely white color. So right now we're not matching up any of those characteristics. And then it asks if the leaf scars are large, pale, and somewhat heart-shaped or shield-shaped. And the end bud, which we saw is larger, which it was larger than our side buds, but this is not a heart-shaped leaf scar. And we know our pith is not brown or tan. So we know it does not have our twig does not have this combination of characteristics. So we're going to look for this symbol. It looks like just a plain little twig over on the next page. Now we're looking at a slightly different picture of our sample here, and it asks about our terminal buds. Those are, remember, the ones at the tip of the twig. It says if several buds of different sizes are clustered irregularly at the tip of the twig, or if the buds are not clustered. Well, we see one terminal bud, a nice big terminal bud right there. So we're going to go below to the bracket down below. And now it asks if there are catkins at the tip of the twigs, which catkins are the short, elongated, they look like little tiny cattails that would be hanging off of our twig here, or if there are no catkins. Well, we don't see any catkins on our sample. So we're going to go to our tree without catkins on the next page. So we're going to go up to the top bracket, and it asks if there are protuberances on the twig, either thorns or thorn-like twigs or round stubby spurs. We don't see any kind of protuberances or thorns on our twig, do we? So we don't see those. So we're going to go all the way to the bracket at the bottom. So now it asks if there is a line or a stipule scar. Remember the stipule scar that was from those modified bracts at the base of the leaf that completely encircles the twig. We would go to the next page, or if there is no such line, we would go to the next page. Well, we see a nice stipule scar that looks like, we can't see all the way around the twig, but it's really good, solid stipule scar above the leaf scar. So we do see that. So we are going to go, you remember our symbol with the stipule scar, to the next page. Top bracket. So now it asks if the leaf scar completely encircles a bud and the buds are brown and conical with only one scale. So the leaf scar would be completely around the bud, and you can see it in this drawing right here, how that leaf scar goes all the way around the bud. Well, when we look at our leaf scar on our samples, it does not go around the bud. It sits clearly beneath the bud. So the next statement is if the leaf scar does not encircle the bud, go below. Well, we're going to go below because our leaf scar sits below the bud. It does not go completely around the bud. So we're going to go to the bracket below. And then it asks us about our terminal bud. If the end bud is shaped like a duck's bill, it is a yellow poplar. Do we think this looks like a duck's bill? This is a great example of a tree that you can really use a characteristic like a duck's bill to describe it. What we have is a yellow poplar or tulip poplar, tulip tree right here. Nice, and that's a very characteristic terminal bud with that duck's bill. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed going through some of the basic characteristics, doing a little bit of practice using the winter tree finder. So you can still grab your boots and take a hand lens when you're doing winter tree ID. And if it's cold, hat and gloves for sure. Although today it's beautiful, might just need your gloves, a book, and your a magnifier or a hand loupe to help you look at some of those characteristics up close to go out and do some winter tree identification. Good luck.
Well, thank you, Lori. We greatly appreciate
You're very
that.
welcome.
It was a great presentation. But what is the basic? And I know it changes, but what is the basic time frame that you could do winter tree ID?
Well, really, once the leaves have come off, I mean, you can even do it when the leaves have turned brown, in late fall, but you've got leaves to look at still then. So once those leaves have dropped, so late October, depending on the species, up until right now, we're starting to get into the period where some of our buds are starting to swell a little bit. We got these warm days, especially with some of our maples. You've seen flowering, on some of them. And so it can be a little tricky the closer we get to spring, but definitely anytime through November through January to do winter tree identification. And I know when we did winter tree identification when I was in school, we did it January and February, and we were wrapped up by the end of February, just because you do have some trees that can be really sensitive. It gets warm, those buds start to swell, and then they don't look quite the same when you're trying to use your dichotomous keys.
Okay. All right. Wonderful.
Yeah, that was good stuff. Appreciate it, Laurie.
You're very welcome. So have fun. Get out there and do some winter tree ID in 60-degree weather today. So.
Hey, that's the best time, I think. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Very cool.
Yes, definitely. And we have another episode. However, we've changed the name just a little bit. Bird of the Month kind of didn't fit because he talks about different things as well. So Dr. DJ McNeil is going to change that up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have Dr. McNeil doing this feeding basics for birds. So I'll go ahead and get that going, Renee.
Okay, folks, welcome to another edition of, we're going to call it Bird of the Month for one last time. We're now switching to what I think is a more appropriate name, Wings of Kentucky. We called this program Bird of the Month. At first, we were sort of trying to workshop a title for it, and I think Wings of Kentucky is a much more appropriate name since we don't really just focus on one kind of bird. And today is going to be another such example where we don't focus on one kind of bird. In fact, we're going to dive into bird feeding basics. Now, we are not going to discuss everything there is to discuss about feeding wild birds today by a long shot, but we're going to discuss just a little bit of the basics to maybe whet your palate if you've been thinking about putting out a bird feeder and getting into bird feeding, which can be a very fun and rewarding activity. And we're going to cover a few different things, but the first thing we'll start with is the different types of feeders. For instance, this one I've shown here is a tube feeder. It's a very popular kind of feeder. It's so called because of its tubular shape. We'll talk about what a tube feeder is, how they work, what kind of birds like to feed from a tube feeder. This is a hopper feeder, which we will also discuss. Again, similar type of thing. What kind of bird feed goes into a hopper feeder, what kind of birds like to feed from them, etc. Similarly with a platform bird feeder, which I will confess is my favorite type of bird feeder, and we'll talk about why that is. And then we'll also talk about suet feeders. I also have a little bit of information here on hummingbird feeders. I'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on that a little bit. But mostly we'll focus on these types of feeders and the birds associated with them. Let's talk about that tube feeder first. So tube feeder is basically any like tubular feeder that's got very small perches, usually around the edges, but in the case of this one here, it's got all of its perches at the bottom. I believe this one might be one of the so-called squirrel-proof feeders, where these little perches, they pull down if there's a lot of weight on them, such as from a squirrel. This is a more standard tube feeder. I think this one's designed for thistle seed, but you can see that they're both tubular, and typically the way feed is put into them is by taking off this lid part, or this lid part, sliding it up the handle, allowing you to dump feed in from the top, and it fills in that way. Birds will sit on the perches here or up here and pull food out of the little openings on the side. And a wide variety of birds will feed from tube feeders. I'm just providing a few examples here. One would be the house finch. This is an image of a house finch, very common feeder bird here in Kentucky. This is the male, of course, the more bright, colorful individual, and the female is a little bit streakier and drabber. Kind of an interesting thing about the house finch is that it's actually not native to Kentucky. So it is native to North America from the western United States. But this species is considered invasive here, or at least certainly exotic. Very cool little bird, though. Despite that, I try not to hold that too much against them, although I'd much prefer our native species. One native that is really common at tube feeders is the American goldfinch. This is the male in the summertime, and we'll talk more about why they like tube feeders. There's a particular kind of feed that they really go crazy for that's frequently put in tube feeders. We have the hopper feeder. So a hopper feeder is referring to any feeder that basically has like sort of a big container of food kind of there, also known as a hopper. And that food hopper usually has like a little opening, like so you can see a gap in the glass here. So this is a big sort of like polygon shape, and it's got two pieces of glass so the feed can be seen, and then there's a little opening at the bottom where the feed can come out, and a little bit of like a tray where the birds can sit on the tray and feed on the food as it comes out of that the bottom of that hopper. Here's another example of a hopper feeder. I would say they're probably one of the more popular feeder types, and a wide variety of bird species will feed from a hopper feeder. Northern cardinals really seem to like them. Blue jays really seem to like them. And of course, all the smaller birds that would feed a tube feeder will also feed at a hopper feeder. So American goldfinch, house finch, things like that. A suet feeder. So these are another really fun one. So a suet feeder is typically looks something like what I've shown here. And this one's actually shown from the back. You see these two little clips here. So it's like a cage, and you can pop those little clips and the cage opens up on one side. And usually you put a store-bought suet cake inside there. And suet cakes, they're weird. It's actually like you get this sort of like waxy, like whitish, creamish colored stuff with seed mixed into it. And that's usually some sort of like animal fat or animal fat product that is got bird feed infused into it and put in there. Now, you can actually just buy like beef fat and stick it in a suet cake feeder, and birds will love it. One thing that's cool about suet cake feeder is that it does attract a bunch of birds that don't like to eat seed. So there's seed in there, but again, like the seed is almost like secondary. A lot of birds will be just attracted to that suet like fat itself. Really common species that'll come to a suet feeder would be like white-breasted nuthatch, red-breasted nuthatch. All of the woodpeckers will visit a suet feeder. This is a downy woodpecker shown here. But the cool thing is, again, you'll get species like Carolina wrens and pine warblers and yellow-rumped warblers that don't normally visit a feeder that will come to a suet feeder. So they don't want to eat seed, but they will pick at the fat from a suet feeder. And you may be wondering, like, what the heck? Why are they eating fat? That's so weird. But in the wintertime especially, that fat and the protein can be really nutritious for birds. And occasionally, if you stumble upon like a fresh deer carcass, for instance, in the woods, I mean, you'll see like chickadees and other birds feeding on the fat of a deer carcass. So it's not that unusual. One thing you do have to be careful of in Kentucky and many other places too with suet feeders is they readily attract European starlings. So if you're trying to avoid attracting starlings to your yard, you might consider either not putting out a suet feeder, or they actually have starling-proof suet feeders, if you can believe such a thing. I don't know what all birds will feed from a suet or a starling-proof suet feeder, but like woodpeckers and nuthatches have no problem feeding from them. The way they work is that the suet is presented upside down, like it's covered from above, so the bird has to hang upside down to get the suet. But things like nuthatches and woodpeckers have no problem doing that, and starlings will not do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a few types of feed you might put in your feeder. We're going to talk about 4 different kinds: black oil sunflower, thistle seed, safflower, as well as mixed bird seed. And we'll talk about each of those seed types here today. Oil sunflower seed, this is kind of a cool type of feed. It's actually the feed that I use the most often in my bird feeders. It doesn't seem like something that would, I don't know, it doesn't seem very special, but the thing that's cool about it is it attracts a huge variety of birds. Like almost any kind of bird that's going to come to your feeder and eat seed will eat black oil sunflower seed. As the name implies, it comes from a sunflower, very similar to this. My colleagues here at UK will tell you that I have a feeder here right by my office that I stock very heavily with black oil sunflower seed, and the birds go nuts for it, but you know, occasionally seeds go underground. We've got chipmunks and things here that'll bury the seeds as well. And by the end of the summer, I have a huge garden of sunflowers that have resulted from the black oil sunflower seed. All kinds of birds like it, but I mean, some species that you will see at a feeder set up with black oil sunflower seed would be like eastern towhee, white-throated sparrows, mourning doves, but just a huge variety of birds will eat it. There are very few things that won't take black oil sunflower seed, but will take other seeds. Next up is thistle seed. These are really tiny little black seeds that are probably one of the more expensive seeds you can buy, but they're really nice because for some species of birds, mostly small finches, they're just absolutely like crack for these birds. And they are indeed the seed of a thistle plant. And one species that just absolutely goes bonkers for them is the American goldfinch. So you can see here we've got some females, we've got breeding males, and look how small these seeds are compared to the birds themselves. These are teeny tiny little seeds, and it's kind of a little bit weird to figure out even how they're getting them out. Well, you can barely see it. There's a tiny little slit in the feeder there, and there's one next to each of these perches. There's one there, and the bird just delicately sticks its skinny little beak in there and pulls those thistle seeds out. You can also get, they call them a thistle sock. It's basically just like, it looks very similar to a white tube sock, and you fill it full of thistle seed, and goldfinches and other small finches will just cling to the side of it and pull thistle seed through it. Next up, we have safflower seed, which, as the name implies, comes from a flower called a safflower, and it's another favorite of really large-billed birds. Northern cardinals seem to really like it. Eastern towhees, again, really like safflower seed. Rose-breasted grosbeaks, which are a kind of a fan favorite, really like safflower seed. It's quite a variety of bird species that'll eat safflower. It's pretty expensive, though. That may be one of the main reasons that I don't use it in my feeders here on campus. But there are a lot of mixed birdseed mixes that will contain safflower, which is nice. Here, my slides are going backwards. That's so weird. throated hummingbird with the male kind of in the middle of the frame here and the female on the right. One important thing that I think always comes up when I talk about hummingbird feeders is what to fill your hummingbird feeder with. And you can buy a commercial hummingbird feed, but my recommendation is that you don't really need to do that. You can actually create your own hummingbird feed by just making a mix of 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. Very important that you don't add food dye to that. So it's very tempting to put some red food coloring or some kind of dye in that. It's absolutely unnecessary. So the reason that hummingbird feeders work so well is that they have these like fake flowers, or more importantly, that they have these colored portions with red and yellow on them. And these are colors that really attract hummingbirds. You don't need the whole entire feeder to be red to attract a hummingbird. They're very good at finding small, colorful spots in their habitat to produce nectar for them. Now, in terms of cleaning, bird feeders do need to be cleaned occasionally. It's recommended that you clean your feeder every 1 to 3 weeks is usually what I recommend. And to clean a bird feeder, pull it down, take it apart, scrub it with hot and soapy water, or if you don't like to do hot and soapy water, you can use a diluted bleach solution with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. That is not recommended for hummingbird feeders. They do not recommend you use soap for those. What I've seen is to just clean them with a scrubby brush and hot water. But one of the reasons why you want to take down your bird feeder, because I mean, you see this sort of thing, you're like, oh, all right, why should I clean my bird feeder? That sounds like some pointless BS, but it actually really is a meaningful thing. And one of the main diseases at your bird feeder, which can absolutely happen. So this is a house finch feeding from a bird feeder, and you can see that its eye is not looking good. So it's got conjunctivitis, and it received that conjunctivitis from an infection from Mycoplasma gallisepticum. And Mycoplasma gallisepticum is a very interesting disease. So you see the species epithet gallisepticum. So the galla part of that refers to chickens or poultry. Gallus means chicken, but really, as best as researchers from Cornell can tell, this disease actually came from turkey farms, and it was kind of a poultry disease, and house finches, like this guy here, contracted a strain of Mycoplasma from a turkey farm. And that disease has now spread like wildfire across the United States, and our house finches are now widely infected with Mycoplasma. Now, other bird species, mostly finches, but not strictly finches, a lot of other birds can get Mycoplasma, but it's very often a house finch disease. The image that I chose for this slide is obviously one I found online. I specifically picked one that depicted the disease, so you can see that this bird is not well, but also I didn't want to disturb people. If you're feeling old, you should go to Google and type house finch eye disease, and you will see some pretty gnarly ones with birds that have enormous lesions. Their entire eye is consumed. And they can survive from Mycoplasma, but as you can see, it clearly impacts their vision, right? So it makes them much more susceptible to predators, and that often leads to their demise right there. Or maybe their eyes are totally swollen shut and they just can't see, right? So that doesn't bode well. So this is the kind of thing that you would want to say, hey, I want to minimize this transmission at my bird feeder, so let's take it down and clean it. If you see a house finch with Mycoplasma, definitely take down your feeders, sterilize them, and I recommend leaving them down for a week or two so that those infected birds can disperse and not continue to spread Mycoplasma. The reason is for Salmonella, which can affect a lot of birds. So this is a pine siskin, which is a little finch related to goldfinch, and they're kind of well known for being susceptible to Salmonella, which can accumulate at bird feeders due to bird droppings. So that's another thing to be careful of. So in terms of like where you want to put your feeders, my recommendation is to basically put your feeders in places where you tend to see birds. So if you have a wide open lawn with like a big open space and want to put a bird feeder out in the middle of your lawn, maybe you'll get some birds there, but like, do you see birds out in the open usually? Well, a lot of birds like a little bit of cover. So here's a brush pile, for example. And this would be a great spot to put a bird feeder nearby because birds can hang out around this brush pile. If there's a predator, like a Cooper's hawk or a mammalian predator, those birds can retreat under that cover and get away. And they also feel more secure, and you're more likely to see more birds when there's cover nearby. So it sort of sounds weird. You would think, oh, if I'm putting my feeder here by this brush pile, the birds, I'm not going to see as many birds. Well, you'll actually see more because they feel safe enough to come out kind of into the open where you can see them. Whereas if you're putting your feeder out in the middle of a lawn, those birds have to brave flying out into the lawn to come to the feeder. And there are some birds that'll do that, but a lot won't. It's also good to put your bird feeder near cover just in case you're attracting predators, right? So you're concentrating birds in a small area where they're going to be more susceptible to a predator. So if a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk or something like that tries to come and prey on your birds that you've attracted with the bird feeder, it seems like the least you can do to give them somewhere to hide if that happens. Okay, I have to touch on squirrels a little bit here. Now in Kentucky, we tend to have 3 species of squirrels or our squirrel relatives that are problematic at bird feeders. The first being the eastern chipmunk, the eastern gray squirrel, and the fox squirrel. So these are squirrels of different sizes that all can absolutely terrorize your bird feeder. And don't get me wrong, we'll talk about squirrel feeding here in a slide or two, and I think that squirrels are cool. All 3 of these are native animals, so they don't deserve all the hate that they get, including the hate that I'm giving them right now. But it can be frustrating, right? Because all 3 of these sciurids, they cache seeds and nuts, or it's also called hoarding. So they'll take big piles of seed and they'll store it away for winter. And that's great for them and very cool. But I don't necessarily want, 3 gray squirrels to eat, 10 pounds of bird seed a day and eat me out of house and home when I want to actually look at the cardinals and titmice and things like that. So we've devised a number of different ways, we as the bird feeding community, not we as me, to minimize the amount of feed that squirrels can receive from a bird feeder. My personal favorite method is the use of something called a squirrel baffle. And a baffle is like a curved piece of plastic or metal most of the time that basically just does not allow squirrel access to the feeder. So in this case, the tube feeders are hanging down and there's a baffle on top. So if a squirrel were going to climb down this chain, it's going to hit this and it's going to slide right off and have no access to the feeder. A more popular style is this. It's actually a flat piece of metal, but you curve it and clip it into place so that it forms like an upside down cone. And there's usually a little stopper here that you put on your shepherd's hook that keeps the baffle in place. So the squirrel will climb up the pole and then he'll kind of get up into here and be unable to get around it. Or maybe he even get to here and he tries to jump, but he's going to grab this and slide right off. So here's what that looks like on the shepherd's hook. And it can be a pretty darn effective way to keep squirrels off your bird feeder. And again, it's no shade to the squirrels. I love squirrels. I think they're really cool animals and they're totally native. But a squirrel or 2 could put this whole thing empty in an afternoon. Whereas it might last a week if only birds are feeding from it. Thing you can do to kind of minimize this is put out squirrel feeders, and there are feeders designed specifically to provide feed for squirrels, and that can be a great way to view these squirrels. And squirrels are very funny, like this big fat fox squirrel here just sitting there with a giant ear of corn. That can be very amusing to have access to some squirrels, as long as they're not devastating your bird feeder and, more importantly, devastating your bird feeding budget. Now, I think the last little thing I want to touch on here are grackles and starlings and blackbirds. And I really like red-winged blackbirds and common grackles but it can be a little much when you have like, 10 blackbirds at your feeder and they just absolutely devastate all the feed in a matter of like an hour or two. And starlings, of course, are not native, so we really aren't fond of those typically. These blackbirds and starlings can become problematic when you have huge concentrations of them. And usually it's something that you see in spring, during spring migration especially. These migrating blackbirds will just kind of like stop at your feeder and they'll totally clean you out for a couple of weeks. But if they're a problem, there are a couple things you can do. Namely, you can put out different kinds of feeds. So if you're going to put out thistle feed, you're not going to be attracting grackles and blackbirds with that. It's way too small for them to bother with. You can put out tube feeders in general. I mean, blackbirds and grackles to a certain extent will feed out of a small tube feeder, but if it's too small, you're going to be minimizing their access to the feed and just minimizing the amount of feed they can take in. So that's a good way. And then if things get really bad, there are a variety of different cages you can put around your bird feeders. So this is a very small one here, but you get the idea where it's a small cage that allows things like goldfinches to enter, or even like, smaller or larger birds like titmice and things like that. But it would preclude a grackle from getting in here and feeding at this feed. So,
we always thank Dr. McNeil for doing these, what now we're going to be calling Wings of Kentucky.
Yes.
And I think that's a very more appropriate name for what we do, since he does everything from bird ID to what birds eat to, you name it. If it's birds, he's doing it. So we really appreciate him doing that week after week. And we did have some questions in the chat pod, but I do believe they got answered. So we're good there. But great show, Billy. From Winter Tree ID and then birds and how to, what you should feed them. I just think it was a really kind of neat all around kind of encompassing topics.
No doubt. I think it was very timely for the season, and we really appreciate everybody turning out today and joining us. We try to do these shows to hit what's going on and what's timely for you. Also, if there's things you all would like to see from the woods today, let us know. You can hit us up on our website. We have a little survey link. You can let us know of any topics you'd like to see, or just shoot us an email, and we'd be happy to do it that way as well. But again, appreciate y'all being with us. Let others know about this. We're here every week on Wednesdays, and we're trying to reach out. We're trying to promote forestry and wildlife and natural resources here in the state that are so abundant but so important. And we all have a role in trying to make them better and more productive. So yeah, thank you all for being with us today.
Yeah, definitely. And like Billy said, you can always see any of our episodes. You just go to FromTheWoodsToday.com and you can watch any episode that we've done. And there are a couple that aren't on. We just updated our website. They didn't get moved over. I'll just have you know, but there will be on hopefully by next week. Yes. So just let you know that. But we greatly appreciate you joining us every week. And until then, take care.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.